At the will reading, my parents smiled as the lawyer handed my brother Ryan a check for $10 million. The sound of the paper sliding across the mahogany table was the only noise in the sterile conference room. Then they turned to me, and my father said, with the casual finality of a judge delivering a foregone conclusion, "It's time you made your own way, Ethan." I didn't cry, I didn't flinch. I focused on a single point of light reflecting off the polished wood, anchoring myself to it as if it were the last solid thing in a collapsing universe. I pretended my pulse wasn't a frantic drum in my ears, a panicked bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Then the atmosphere in the room shifted. Mr. Davison, my grandfather's oldest friend and the executor of his estate, a man with kind eyes and a spine of unbendable steel, slowly rose from his chair. "There's a final addendum," he announced, his voice cutting through my family's quiet satisfaction. He produced a worn, cream-colored envelope from his briefcase, sealed with the wax stamp bearing my grandfather's personal crest. My mother's serene smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. My father's fingers, which had been tapping a self-satisfied rhythm on the table, went still. Ryan's eyes, gleaming with the triumph of a lifetime of being the favored son, narrowed into slits of suspicion. That single envelope was the first tremor of an earthquake, one destined to fracture the very foundations of the life they had so carefully constructed upon a bedrock of lies. The aftershocks began in a place I hadn't dared to visit in over a year. My grandfather's old design studio on the industrial fringe of the city, a place where the scent of old paper and graphite had once been my only comfort, and now felt heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 unspoken words. I hadn't set foot in the studio since the spring before my grandfather passed. It was unsettling how a space that was once an extension of my own soul could now feel so alien. The puddles in the alley outside reflected a gray, unforgiving sky. The rusted pattern on the fire escape was an old, familiar scar. The heavy steel door, which I once opened with a key that felt like it unlocked the world, seemed to hold me at a distance. As I pushed it open, the scent of wood shavings, ink, and decades of settled dust greeted me like a forgotten memory. But beneath it was the cold, sterile air of a pig whose heart had stopped beating. "It took you long enough to come back." The voice emerged from the shadows of the cavernous room. It was Mrs. Gable, my grandfather's assistant for 40 years, a tiny woman whose presence filled the studio more than any furniture. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression an unreadable mask of hardened grief. I remained frozen on the threshold, a trespasser in my own history, searching her face for a flicker of the warmth I remembered from childhood. There was none, only a chilling disappointment that felt sharper than anger. "Mrs. Gable, what happened?" I managed to ask, my voice a rough, unfamiliar whisper. I was told he was tired, that he wasn't up for visitors, that he had a new life with his family. Her composure cracked, just for a second, a brief, painful tremor in her voice before it was sheathed in steel again. "He asked for you, Ethan, every day until the very end. He sat by that old black phone on the wall, waiting for a call that he was promised would come, but never did." A knot of ice formed in my stomach. "That's impossible. I called constantly. I even came by in March for his birthday. Ryan met me at the door. He told me Grandpa was having a good day, sleeping peacefully, and that he'd have him call me the moment that he woke up. The call never came." Mrs. Gable's eyes narrowed into slits of cold fire. "He wasn't sleeping, Ethan. He was right here, at his drafting table, with a cake I'd baked for him, hoping the sound of the door was you." The silence that followed was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. She turned and walked to his old desk, her movements stiff with sorrow, and retrieved a leather-bound address book. "This is the number they gave us for you," she said, pointing to a page. I saw my name, and next to it, in my mother's neat, elegant handwriting, a phone number I had never seen before in my life. That's not my number, I said, stumbling back against a cold steel support beam for balance. I've had the same number for 15 years. She looked from the book to my face, her own expression a slow, dawning horror. They told us you wanted to be left alone, that your new life was too important, that you had changed your number to keep your distance from what they called this dusty old life. No, I said, the word barely a breath. They didn't just keep me away. They built a wall and told both of us the other person had built it. They made me disappear. Her strength seemed to finally desert her, and she sank into the worn leather chair by the desk, a chair that still held the faint imprint of my grandfather's form, and her face crumpled. The funeral, I whispered, the memory still a raw, open wound. They told me it was at noon on Friday. The cemetery was empty when I arrived. A groundskeeper told me the service had been that morning. She looked up, her eyes brimming with a shared, terrible understanding. It was at 9 in the morning, Ethan. They stood there, your parents and your brother, and told all of your grandfather's friends and colleagues that you refused to come, that you were too busy with a project to honor the man who gave you everything. I couldn't breathe. It felt as if the air had been vacuumed from the room. I would have crawled over broken glass to be at his funeral. The studio, my childhood sanctuary, began to spin, the silence roaring in my ears like a physical blow. I collapsed onto a nearby stool, my hands gripping the edge of the drafting table he had taught me on, my knuckles white. I didn't know, I choked out, the words a confession of a crime I didn't commit. He died thinking I abandoned him. Her hand found mine across the scarred wood, her touch surprisingly firm. He never thought that, she said, her voice soft but fierce. He knew them, and he knew you, and now we know the truth. That is where we begin. We sat like that for a long time, the quiet punctuated only by the distant, mournful rumble of a passing train. It was a silence of shared grief and burgeoning righteous anger. Finally, Mrs. Gable stood, a new, cold resolve in her posture. It's time, she sighed. Time for what? She went to the old rotary phone on the wall and began to dial, each click of the wheel a deliberate, measured beat, a countdown to a reckoning. David, she said into the receiver, her voice pure ice. I need you, your wife Helen, and your son Ryan here at the studio within the hour. There was a protest on the other end, a spluttering of excuses, but she cut it short. It is not a request. It is a summons. She hung up. Mr. Davison is on his way as well, she said, turning to me. Your grandfather left a final directive. It was to be opened only with all of you in this room. We are going to honor his wishes to the letter. I just nodded, unable to form words. I sat at that table, tracing the deep scars in the wood, each one a memory. Here, he showed me how to draw a perfect circle by hand. Here, I showed him my first amateur blueprint for a community library. Here, I told him I wanted to design buildings that felt like they were breathing, like they had a soul. He never laughed. I heard their voices before I saw them, echoing in the alley. My mother's affected cheerfulness, a sound designed to smooth over any unpleasantness. Eleanor, my goodness, this place could use a woman's touch. So much dust. My father's controlled, authoritative baritone. I trust this won't take long. We have dinner reservations. And Ryan's impatient, dismissive sigh. I have a multi-million-dollar closing tomorrow. Can we please get on with whatever this is? Then Mrs. Gable's voice, colder than a winter wind off the Hudson. Sit. We are waiting for Mr. Davison. We will be reading Arthur's final wishes. I could hear the scrape of chairs on the concrete floor, the confused, irritated murmurs. They had no idea I was only a few feet away, listening to their casual disrespect. They had no idea their carefully constructed world was about to be dismantled piece by piece by the ghost of the man they had so thoroughly betrayed. Another set of footsteps announced the lawyer's arrival. Let's proceed, he said, his tone all business. That was the signal. Ethan, Mrs. Gable called out, her voice ringing with a strength I hadn't heard in years. You can come in now. I rose from the stool. My heart was a wild, frantic bird beating against my ribs. As I stepped through the doorway into the main studio, 3 sets of eyes locked onto me. 3 faces, a symphony of shock and horror. My mother's polite smile froze, then shattered like fine china. My father's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching uncontrollably. Ryan's confident smirk evaporated, leaving behind a pale, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. The air in the room became thin, charged with the static of a lie being struck by lightning. It wasn't just surprise on their faces, it was the primal fear of being caught. They stared, speechless, as if I were a specter summoned from a forgotten grave. My father, the man always in control, looked for the first time in his life completely lost. Ryan, the deal maker, the master of any room he entered, looked like a man who had just discovered the contract he was holding was written in invisible ink. I held their gazes, my posture straight. I would not be the frightened, eager-to-please boy they remembered. Mrs. Gable indicated an empty drafting stool, and I sat, my movements slow, deliberate, each motion a quiet act of defiance. Mr. Davison, the lawyer, offered a brief professional nod in my direction before opening his briefcase and extracting the cream-colored envelope. This, he announced to the silent, stunned room, is a holographic codicil to the will of Arthur Prynne, witnessed and sealed. It includes a personal letter, which he instructed me, in the event of his passing, to read aloud in this room, and only if all persons I am about to name are present. He began, To my dear friend and lifelong confidant, Eleanor Gable, I leave our family home in Scarsdale and a lifetime stipend sufficient for her comfort and care. She knows where to find the rest. He turned a page. To my grandson, Ryan Prynne, he said, and the room seemed to hold its breath. I bequeath the Prynne real estate portfolio, all commercial properties, and all associated financial holdings, with the notable exception of the property located at 112 Dock Street in Brooklyn. A sharp, almost imperceptible intake of breath came from my mother. Her gaze flickered nervously from my father to Ryan. I remained impassive, a statue carved from grief and newfound resolve. Mr. Davison continued, his voice even. To my grandson, Ethan Prynne, he said, and the air grew thin, heavy. I bequeath the aforementioned property at 112 Dock Street, known colloquially as the Old Foundry, and all contents therein. Furthermore, I leave to him, and to him alone, my entire private library, including my personal architectural journals, my original blueprints, and all intellectual property contained within. The silence was broken by Ryan, who shot to his feet with a violent screech of his stool against the floor. The Foundry, he choked out, his voice a strangled mix of rage and disbelief. He gave him that useless, derelict pile of bricks. That's impossible. He spun toward our parents, his finger trembling as he pointed at them. You told me he saw a reason. You said he was proud of my vision for that land. You swore to me he would leave it all to me if I just kept him happy. My father's lips formed a thin, white, bloodless line. My mother stared at her hands in her lap as if they belonged to a stranger she had just met. There is more, Mr. Davison said calmly, a quiet command in his voice that made Ryan sink back into his seat. He took a folded, worn letter from Mrs. Gable. Arthur wrote this in his final days, she said softly. He made me promise. The lawyer carefully unfolded the creased paper. The room seemed to shrink as my grandfather's powerful, unwavering voice, channeled through the lawyer, filled the space. My dearest Ethan, if you are hearing these words, it means I'm gone. But my faith in you, my boy, is not. You were always the observer, the quiet one who saw the poetry in a steel beam, the history in a brick wall, while others saw only profit and loss. My mother's shoulders began to shake with silent, repressed sobs. You had to forge your own truth in a family that had no time for it. The letter continued. A feeling bloomed in my chest, something warmer and stronger than revenge. It was validation. It was light pouring into a dark room. You were never the disappointment, Ethan. You were the legacy. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sudden, but I let them be. I wanted them to see. I wanted them to witness the truth they had tried so hard to bury. I saw you as a boy, mesmerized by the skeletons of old buildings, trying to understand how they held the weight of stories, not just concrete. I saw your light dim each time your father dismissed your sketches as unrealistic daydreams, or your brother called your community projects a waste of good land. I heard them. I heard my father let out a sharp, pained, involuntary breath. Ryan was easier for them, Mr. Davison read on, his voice unwavering. He built what they valued, things that were tall, shiny, and bankable. His success was a currency they understood. But you, Ethan, you wanted to build things they couldn't quantify. Refuge, community, a sense of place. And because they couldn't understand your language, your passion, they chose to pretend you weren't speaking at all. Ryan now stared at the concrete floor, his arms wrapped tightly around himself as if holding himself together. He played the role they wrote for him, and he played it well. But you insisted on writing your own. And that, my boy, is the definition of courage. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. I didn't move to wipe it away. I remember the day you won your first design award from the Architectural Guild for the homeless shelter you designed in your spare time. You never even brought the trophy home. You told me that they wouldn't get it, Grandpa. They'd ask how much it paid. You deserved a parade that day, Ethan. You deserve to be seen. I cannot undo their blindness. I cannot give you back the years of feeling invisible, but I can give you a space that is wholly and completely yours. A place to build without seeking their approval or their permission. A canvas for your soul. Go make something beautiful. The lawyer folded the letter. The silence that followed was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 unspoken apologies, 1,000 moments of casual, soul-crushing cruelty. I remember that award, I said, my voice quiet but as clear as a bell in the silent studio. Dad didn't come to the ceremony. He was at Ryan's closing for that new glass condo tower. He said my little hobby could wait. Ryan winced as if he'd been physically struck. Dad, I said, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I possessed. That wasn't just the past. That was a choice. Just like it was a choice to tell me Grandpa was fine when he was dying. Just like it was a choice to give him a fake phone number for me, a dead end, so I couldn't reach him. I turned my gaze to my brother. And you? You stood by and watched it all happen. You let them erase me because a ghost can't cast a shadow on the favored son. That's not fair, Ryan mumbled, his voice thick. I did what was expected. No, I said calmly, the cold clarity of truth settling over me. You got what you wanted. You were the star, the heir apparent. I was the strange, quiet project in the corner. But Grandpa saw me, and now, finally, you have to see me too. You don't get to pretend I don't exist anymore. My mother stood, her face streaked with tears, a mask of practiced regret. Ethan, please. We are your family. We made mistakes. Mistakes? Mrs. Gable cut in, her voice shaking with a lifetime of pent-up rage. You stole his final days with his grandfather. You let that good, kind man die, thinking his boy, his heart, had forgotten him. That is not a mistake. That is a sin of the highest order. My father, regaining some of his composure, stood tall. That's enough. This is absurd. We'll contest this codicil. The man wasn't in his right mind when he wrote this. I almost laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. He was the only one who ever was, I said, and his mind, his thoughts, his plans for the foundry are all meticulously documented in those journals you just heard about, journals that I now own. The color drained from my father's face. He knew, as I did, that my grandfather, the architect, documented everything. Their lies were no match for his written truth. Mrs. Gable walked to the center of the room, her small frame radiating an immense power. "Leave," she said, looking at my parents and brother with utter contempt. "This place, this legacy, is no longer yours to tarnish. Get out." They stared at her, then at me, searching for a familiar foothold of weakness or guilt and finding none. For the first time, there was no power in their gaze, only a pathetic, dawning defeat. Ryan left first, shoulders slumped, his victory turned to ash. My parents followed, a pair of aging ghosts, their empire of deceit crumbled to dust around them. The heavy steel door clanged shut, the sound echoing through the vast, quiet space. I stood there for a moment, rooted to the spot. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was a quiet, profound, and terrifying relief. "They'll try to fight it," I said to Mrs. Gable, my voice barely a whisper. "Let them," she replied, a faint, weary smile on her lips. "Your grandfather was a brilliant architect. He built things to last." It took a long time for that to sink in. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a place at a table where I was never truly welcome. I had been trying to earn love from people who only understood the currency of success and convenience. My grandfather had seen that. He hadn't left me money or power in a way they understood. He had left me something far more valuable. He had left me a foundation, both literally and figuratively. "I think I need some air," I said. Mrs. Gable nodded, and I stepped outside into the cool, damp city air. The world felt different, lighter. I thought of that 10-year-old boy sitting at the drafting table, sketching impossible buildings with rooftop gardens and flying buttresses. He hadn't been a mistake. He'd just been waiting for someone to give him permission to start building. Now, finally, he had it.